Hello and welcome to Tuesday Tales of Terror. I'm your host, as usual, Kali Mortwood. Looks like we're actually live. Yay! It's really funny because I don't believe it until it says it, and then every single time in my videos, it's me patiently waiting for it to say, "You're alive." So, we were reading Avi's The Man Who Was Poe. And we had just gotten to chapter 2. And we're with our young lad, Edmund, and a gentleman calling himself Mr. Dupin, who we just learned is actually Edgar Allan Poe himself. Oops, what just fell out? Oh, my sticker. Chapter 2. Drink some water. Tonight we're rocking the Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We've got some work to do now. All right, I am ready. As Edmund led Mr. Dupin toward his room, the elegant houses along Benefit Street gave way to the much poorer ones of Fox Point. Dupin said nothing. He was too busy thinking about how he might best describe the boy. Sad, rather thin, certainly desperate. The thought made him wonder if Edmund was desperate enough to shade the truth. Could he trust him? Dupin stole a look at him. Edmund was being very silent. "Are we close to water?" Dupin asked. Edmund, starting, looked up. "What, sir?" "I asked you if we're close to water." "Just 2 blocks, sir," Edmund replied. "It's the head of Narragansett Bay, where the coastal ships dock." "You've been there?" "Yes, sir. My sister and I collect boat names." "Collect names?" My mom does that. She works as a secretary or head secretary in the jury duty department, etc., etc., and she finds funny names that she likes, and she collects them, brings them home. After a moment, Edmund said, "We don't have much else to do." Dupin looked inquiringly at him. "You see, we get tired being in our room all day," Edmund explained. "So when Auntie leaves, we go too. Well, actually, it's my sister who insists. And I do need to look after her, don't I? Auntie doesn't like us going to the docks, you see. Says it's dangerous. Auntie says most things are dangerous, but we have made friends there. Do you know Captain Ellis? He knows everything about ships." Dupin frowned. "Could your sister have gone down to the docks when you went out?" he asked. "She's not supposed to, not without me." Dupin frowned. "Did you ask your captain if he'd seen her?" Edmund shook his head. "Why not?" Edmund grew thoughtful and said, "Auntie says we're not to talk on family things." "You spoke to me." "You insisted, sir." "Perhaps," Dupin pressed, "your sister went in search of you. You said you came right back. Is that true? No shop windows to examine, no cats to observe." Beneath Dupin's stern gaze, Edmund hung his head. "An old man requested help in finding his way, sir." "Ah, but Auntie Prue says you should always help the old ones. So you see, I had to." "You were detained for how long, Edmund? Be exact." 1 minute? An hour? Details are crucial. How long was it?" "I'm not sure," Edmund admitted. "I thought as much. And you may have neglected to lock the door, too." "I did lock the door to our room, sir. She couldn't have gotten out. But, Edmund, she was not there. But show me the dock area." "Now? Edmund, do you desire my help or not?" Yes, sir. They started off again. Edmund kept stealing troubled glances at the man. After a while, he stopped. Sir, he said, I truly don't think Sis would have come to the docks. Not without me. Why? I've thought it over. I think that after I left, Auntie must have returned, and then together they went in search of me. Somehow we've missed one another. But now, you see, they're back in the room. Please, sir, don't think me ungrateful, but perhaps, if it's all the same, I don't need your help. Dupin put a firm hand on Edmund's shoulder. Edmund, there's a difference between what happens and what we would like to have happened. No, we are almost at the docks, and we shall look. He steered the boy on. They reached the waterfront. The cold November moon, partially hidden by the mist, shed pale light of a gravestone hue. Silhouettes of silent ships, mostly sail, some steam, bobbed gently on the bay. Small waves licked the quay. A buoy bell clanged. Dupin nodded in appreciation. It was the perfect setting for the story. Then he saw, 30 yards away, 2 men, one holding a lantern, both staring at something on the dock. Come along, Dupin said. Suddenly he drew in his breath and stopped. What's the matter? Edmund asked. Dupin put down his carpet bag. A suspicion about what the men might be studying began to grow upon him. Wait here, he said. Is something wrong? I'm going to speak to those men. Sir, I do think it'd be better if I returned. Stay, Dupin said, slipping off his greatcoat and draping it around Edmund's shoulders so as to keep the boy warm. And mind my bag. Before Edmund could protest further, Dupin walked away. As he approached the 2 men, he saw that the one holding the lamp was large and powerfully built. His hands were huge, his face broad, flat, and round, disfigured by a scar on the left cheek. His bald head was fringed with thin hair that touched his collar. On his jacket was a brass star, the emblem of the Providence Night Watch. With him was a short, ferret-faced, white-haired, older man, whose wiry body coiled upon itself in a stoop. His eyes kept shifting nervously. Dupin was struck by the ugliness of the 2. Still he drew closer. As he did, the man with the star on his chest looked up. Is a gentleman, he announced. Oh, gravely. Is a gentleman. Let him see. Oh, it was the little one. Damn. The white-haired man gave way. Dupin, his apprehension growing, drew near. In a glance he saw it was a woman who lay on the wharf planks. She was dead, but her eyes were still open and held the unmistakable look of shock. It was as if her last view of the world had been some terrible grief. Her fair hair spread beneath her like an ornamental Japanese fan. Oh, what a beautiful image! Her soaking dress clung to her thin young body. Streaked with green slime, the ivory garment made her look as if she had been cut from marble. Wow, that's really lovely. The vision of destroyed youth and beauty sent a tremor through Dupin. He gasped for breath. His fists clenched spasmodically. His head began to throb, and he managed not to faint only when the man with the star grabbed him with quick, powerful hands. A ghastly prettiness, sir, now ain't she? The man said. Dupin continued to stare at the woman. She had, he realized, an unmistakable resemblance to Edmund. Where was she found? He managed to ask. The large man touched fingers to his forehead. Providence Night Watch at your service, sir, he said. Mr. Asa Throck on duty. It was Fourtnoy here, he indicated his companion, who just now pulled her out. Dupin turned to the white-haired man. Fourtnoy, as though requesting permission, twisted up out of his stoop. because he's hunched over. That's right. Throck gave a sharp, commanding nod. Reassured, Fourtnoy gestured toward the bay. "I was just in from my boat," he began, his voice a high whine. "Relieved of my watch. It was the whiteness of her dress floating beneath the prow of a clipper that took my attention." "Who is she?" Dupin asked. Fourtnoy darted an alarmed look at Throck. The night watchman grunted. "We've no idea," he said. Dupin, without his greatcoat, shivered in the chilling damp. He glanced over his shoulder. Edmund was looking toward him. "What will happen to her now?" he asked Throck. "I've sent for the wagon," Throck replied. "There'll be an inquest in the morning. Then, if no one claims her, off to the pauper's field for burial." Edmund, waiting nervously, saw Dupin beckon. Reluctantly, he picked up the carpet bag and came forward, puzzled that the three men were watching him so intently. "Put down the bag," Dupin said. Edmund did, then drew closer, only to realize that someone was lying on the dock. Frightened, he halted and looked to Dupin for an explanation. "Do you know who that is?" Dupin said. Edmund was afraid to move. Dupin turned the boy to look. "There," he whispered. Edmund darted a swift glance at the body. The sight made his insides shrivel. Hardly able to breathe, he turned away and leaned into Dupin. "Your aunt?" Dupin whispered. Edmund could not speak. "Is it?" "It's not her dress." "Her face, Edmund. Her face." Edmund, unwilling to look again, pressed his eyes against Dupin. "Answer." That time Edmund nodded. The man with the star stretched forward and touched Dupin's shoulder. "That there your boy?" he asked. Dupin swung about, putting himself between Throck and Edmund. "We must go," he said, retrieving his carpet bag. With a hand on the boy's shoulder, he led the way from the dock. "But, Auntie," Edmund whimpered, unable to find the courage to look back. "They will take care of her," Dupin said, giving the boy a gentle push. "Now, take me to your room." Edmund went. "Oh, well, that was fortuitous that Dupin and Edmund happened to be together at the same time and right when they found the aunt's body, because otherwise Edmund never would have known to check the docks to find that Auntie had died. That was the end of chapter 2. We are moving on to chapter 3. Steps in the Night. "There's my building," Edmund said. "The door's around by the rear." It was the first time either had spoken since leaving the waterfront. He looked up at Dupin. "Sir, must it be me who tells her?" "What are you talking about?" "I'm sure she's returned. I've left the door to her room open, and she'll need to know about Auntie." "Who must know?" Dupin said. "Sis." Dupin stood so suddenly that Edmund looked up at him. The man's eyes were closed. "You mean," Dupin whispered, "your sister?" "Yes, sir." "Sis," Dupin said with difficulty, "was the name of my late wife." "Oh, sir, I had no idea. Very sorry." "You should be," Edmund snapped. "What?" After a moment, he opened his eyes. "What is the name of this place?" "Ann Street." Dupin looked around. There was nothing but dark tenement buildings. "Lead on." "Thank you, sir," Edmund said, deciding not to ask his question again. Instead, he made his way to the back door. "Mind the steps," he cautioned. At the top of the 4 flights of dark stairs, the boy opened the door that led to the hall. There, unable to restrain himself, he ran to the far end and flung open the door to his room. "Sis!" he cried. No one was there. Dupin pushed by him, and at a glance took in the room's meager furnishings. "Do you have a lamp?" he asked. "Some candles?" Edmund was too numb to reply. "What about food?" Dupin said, fingering an empty water basin. Edmund managed to shake his head. "Hardly a way to receive guests," Dupin said, sourly. "Is there a place to buy some at this hour?" Edmund struggled to rouse himself. "There's a saloon, sir. It's not far. They sell bread and meat pies." Dupin produced a purse from his carpet bag and, after momentary calculation, selected a few coins which he gave to Edmund. "A meat pie for both of us, and see if they'll sell you candles. Hurry now, I've not eaten since noon." "Yes, sir." "What is it?" Dupin said, when Edmund made no move to go. Is Auntie truly dead?" Dupin turned from the boy's pain. "You saw for yourself." "Sir? What? It wasn't her dress." "Edmund, your aunt is dead." "But then, where's my sister?" "I haven't the slightest idea. Now, go." Still Edmund stood, uncertain. "Go!" Edmund gripped the coins and went off. Dupin listened tensely until the boy's steps retreated down the hallway. When he was sure Edmund was gone, he reached for his carpet bag and brought out a notebook, as well as pen and ink. Quickly, he scratched out a few words. Of course, Edmund was hesitating to run off to the saloon because he has trauma from running to the saloon in the first place and losing his sister. Oh, Dupin. Story. Edmund, a boy. Missing sister. The sea, bringer of death. Abandonment. Release death. Then he added, the necessity of death. The certainty of death. The act of writing eased his tension. He read over what he had done. The words gave him a sharp pang of pain. Why must death always be certain? Could he never escape it? Never think of another ending? Depression crowded in. Desperate to quiet the pain of his emotions, Dupin slipped the notebook back into his bag and removed a liquor bottle, pulled its cork, and drank deeply. Then he stood by the window and looked out. What he saw was as uninviting as everything else he'd so far observed. Another miserable building, so close he could lean out and touch its filthy windows. As the liquor took hold, his pain gave way to anger. Why was he in such a place? It all made his head ache. Uneasy on his feet, Dupin returned to the table. After replacing the empty bottle in his bag, he took out another and drank that one off too. Gradually, his headache eased. Drowsiness replaced it. Soon, he was cradling his head in his arms and dozing. Edmund stood just outside his building. A heavy fog had crept in from the bay and made the night more impenetrable than ever. The few candles still burning in windows seemed draped in shrouds. His own emotions were in tatters. Barely 24 hours ago, he'd left Sis. How many times since then had he rebuked himself for leaving her? If only he had listened to his auntie's cautions. But now he sucked in a deep breath. Auntie was dead. Momentarily he closed his eyes. It was too difficult to grasp. And now there was this man, Mr. Dupin. Would he truly help? Edmund couldn't think it through. He forced himself to set off toward the saloon, but hardly had he done so when he heard footsteps. At once he stopped and looked about. Uh-oh. He saw nothing. Again he moved. Again the footsteps came. That time Edmund thought he saw someone on the far side of the street. When he caught sight of what appeared to be light or whitish hair, his heart gave a tumble. "Auntie!" he cried. The shape seemed to collapse upon itself and disappear. Edmund gazed into the fog, but could make out nothing more. Then he recalled a fairy tale Sis had read to him, and its notion that the recent dead hovered about their former homes, unwilling to abandon the ones they loved. But Auntie had always said there were no ghosts. With a convulsive shudder, Edmund turned and hurried on. Ugh! Convulsive shudder. This time the saloon was not quite so empty. The man behind the counter was the same, but at one of the two tables sat 3 men wearing coats and jackets against the chill. They were playing cards. Half-filled glasses of rum and water stood before them. When Edmund walked in, everyone looked up. All conversation stopped. Edmund noticed that one of them was the night watchman from the docks. He made his way to the counter. The counterman looked down at him. Yes, boy, he demanded. What do you want this time? Please, sir, Edmund said, dumping Mr. Dupin's coins on the counter. A meat pie and candles. Large pie or small? This is the money I have, sir. The man made a show of slowly counting the coins. 2 candles or a small pie, he said, taking up the money. From a cabinet he fetched candles and matches. From a box, that was kind of him to also grab matches. From a box behind the counter he retrieved a crusty pie, dusted it off, laid it down on his pile of newspapers, wrapped everything up, and thrust the package into Edmund's hands. All the while he gazed at him as if he were some curious bug. Things sure were different, weren't they? Just blows the dust off of an old pie. Thank you, sir, Edmund said, and started out. As soon as Edmund left, the counterman leaned toward those at the table. Is that the boy? He asked. The one you was just talking about? The same, Throck returned. He from England only a while. Now it's his aunt what got drownded. The card game resumed. In moments the door opened again. Fourtnoy entered. His thin face was protected against the cold by a high coat collar and a muffler. Throck turned. Well, he demanded. The boy came directly here, Fourtnoy informed him. Then headed right back. Nothing else. And the other? As far as I can tell, still there. Did the boy see you? For a moment I thought he did, but I stepped away. Oh, it was Fourtnoy who was following him. That's who was stepping in the shadows. That's why he saw the shock of white hair. Disgusted, Throck flung his cards down, and with hardly more than a farewell glance at his companions, left the saloon with Fourtnoy. What's the matter with them? Said one of the men at the table. Don't you know what he's been working on? Said the counterman. No, he said nothing to me. I'll show you, the counterman said. He crossed the room to the wall of bills and posters. Here, he said, and read from a bill. Reward. Persons providing information leading to the finding of one Mrs. G. Ratchet of London, England, but believed to be a recent resident of Providence, Rhode Island, shall be entitled to a bonded reward. Please contact Mr. Poley, Providence Bank, South Main, at earliest convenience, October 15th, 1848. One man at the table snorted. Makes you wonder which part of the law Mr. Throck practices, doesn't it? Well, offered the other, bread'll take butter on either side. Okay, I like that. Bread will take butter on either side. Same. Wink. Edmund, carrying the meat pie and candles, burst into the room. Mr. Dupin, I got... Dupin was asleep, slumped over the table, empty bottle in hand. A stench of liquor filled the air. Mr. Dupin? Edmund said again. There was still no response. Edmund lit a match, let wax drip, fastened the candle on the table, and unwrapped the package. Then he gave Dupin a slight shake. "Mr. Dupin!" Dupin continued to sleep. Feeling the pangs of hunger, Edmund broke the pie in half. To his dismay, one piece was slightly bigger than the other. He set the larger portion down on the table. Then he paused and studied the sleeping Dupin. Suddenly he reached out and exchanged the pieces, taking the bigger one for himself. Sitting on the bed, he devoured it in a few bites. Once he had eaten, his misery returned. Why had his auntie been killed? And where was his mother? And was she even alive? Auntie had insisted they believed she was, but now! And Sis, where was she? And what would become of him? Would he be killed? If he did live, who would take care of him? Edmund listened to Dupin's labored breathing, and again asked himself if this man would truly help. He'd been glad of his providential kindness. Still, he couldn't deny there was something odd about the man. Was it Mr. Dupin's hesitation when he had asked his name, his sudden changes of mood, his drinking? Drinking, Auntie had said, was evil. Edmund sighed. Auntie objected to so much. He could almost hear her voice. Adults can be trusted to take care of children. Children must never question adults. Adults know best. Mr. Dupin is an adult. Edmund stole a guilty look at Dupin. There was the business of his stepfather, which he had not told him, but how could he reveal such a thing to anyone? Auntie had called it shameful. Then the most painful question of all returned. Where was his sister? Even as he asked it, answering it now this way, now that, Edmund sank into a fit full of sleep. As Edmund slept, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Dupin opened his eyes. Who's there? He called out. All he saw was a candle before him with its small, blue, sputtering flame. Dizzy, confused, Dupin leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. It was crisscrossed with cracked lines, alive as a nest of vipers, creating fantastical shapes and ghastly configurations. Oh, it's so good! In one such nest of lines he saw a death's head. In another, a pool of blood. In a third, a grave. Wincing, Dupin turned away to stare at the equally marred walls. No images there, just words. Poe was what he saw first. Then Mother, followed by carefully written letters which spelled out Sis. Finally, inevitably, the word Death loomed large. Dupin gave a violent shake to his head. Shivering, he drew his greatcoat over his shoulders and rested his face in his hands. In the close, cupped darkness he knew so well appeared the image of the drowned woman. Now another image. Edmund. As Dupin watched, the skin from the boy's face tightened, split, and, snake-like, dropped away, leaving only a skull. Dupin began to sweat. Death! Always death! His whole body rocked with pain. Leaning forward, he cradled his head in his arms and sank into a deep sleep. The candle flame grew smaller and at last gutted out. As darkness descended, a piece of paper was slipped under the door. Just as softly, footsteps retreated along the hall, down the stairs, and into the mist-drenched night. Wonderful. Well, that concludes Chapter 3, and perfect timing to end our reading for this evening. So, thank you for joining me in Part 2 of Avi's The Man Who Was Poe, and I'm intrigued. Who do you think this mystery person is who left a note under the door? What do you think the note says? Where has Sis gone? Why is it possible that Dupin's wife is also called Sis? What are the odds of that? So wild. Why are they chasing this poor child? Thank you for being here, and I hope that you are enjoying your time on this planet in this little weird mortal body that you've got. And I hope you're giving it all you got. I love you. And peace. Stay spooky. Get out of here, you weirdos. Ciao.